All right, good morning, everybody. We'll go ahead and get started here in 30 seconds. All right. Yes. It's loud, isn't it? Exactly. I have the flu. I swear I'm not sick. All right, well, everybody, please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Will Director Frost lead us in the pledge?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, thank you, everybody, for being here this morning. And a very special thanks to all of you that were on Cap to Cap for, I'm sure, being very tired, including staff, but being here this morning to ensure that we have quorum and that we get the people's work done. And also for those that are also at CSAC, that may be taking a break from the CSAC conference as well. So thank you all this morning. So with that, we will go to roll call and any council.
Thank you. Good morning. Just a reminder for our board members seated around the table, our microphones, when you press the button and it's green, that means your voice is being projected overhead and into our Zoom system for the public to be able to hear. You don't need to pick it up and speak into it. You should be able to just leave it near you and it should pick you up just fine. Good morning. I'll go ahead and provide roll call. Director Baines.
Present.
Bradford.
Here.
Branscombe.
Yes.
Bullahan.
Here.
McCulley for Burris.
Here.
Chapman.
Here.
Desmond. Absent. Dowden Calvillo. Absent. Frost.
Here.
Gallardo.
Here.
Gog. Absent. Guerrero.
Here.
Harris. Absent. Howdeshelt. Absent. Kennedy.
Here.
Jennings.
Here.
Joyner.
Here.
Jones. Absent. Nisley.
Here.
Kozlowski.
Here.
Lauren. Absent. Lozano.
Here.
Sander. Absent. Schaefer.
Here.
Teeter. Thomas.
Here.
Bang. Vega.
Here.
Villegas.
Here.
Vice Chair Soon. Absent. Chair Saragosa.
Here.
And ex officio member Aceves.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Lynette. We will move on to public communication. This is a time for anyone who wishes to address the board on any item that does not appear on the agenda. Is there any member of the public that wishes to make a comment?
There's no public communications at this time.
All right, thank you very much. We will then move on to the consent calendar. These items are intended to be approved in one motion. However, an item can be removed for separate discussion. Is there any director that wishes to remove an item from the consent calendar? See none. Do we have any members of the public that wishes to speak on a consent calendar item?
There's no public comment.
All right, seeing none, is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
Thomas move approval.
Joiner seconds.
All right, thank you, Director Thomas and Joyner. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion carries. Thank you. All right, moving right along, we will move to our action items. And item number 12, and that is to adopt our final budget in OWP for fiscal year 2024-2025. And Ms. Sue has this item for us this morning. Thank you, Loretta.
Thank you. Good morning, directors. Loretta Sue, Finance Director. As required by federal regulations and mandates, SACOG is required to develop an overall work programs, also known as OWP, and budget annually. The OWP includes projects and activities that support the SACOG region and also SACOG planning activity for the upcoming fiscal year. The OWP work plan activities for the fiscal year 2024-25 align and supports SACOG's strategic goal, which include equity, economy, and environment. Staff have submitted a draft budget to Caltrans and federal agencies for review and comment back in March, just to ensure that the purpose of the funding source supporting the work program is consistent. And at the March board meeting, the board approved the release of the draft budgets for public comments. So today, staff is recommending that the board take actions to adopt the final budget and OWP for fiscal year 2024-25, so staff can submit it to the state and federal agencies for approval to begin expenditures for the fiscal year starting July 1st, 2024. Staff had provided an overview of 2024 work plan and draft budget to the board at its March meeting. So today I will just briefly highlight some of the major changes that is included in the final budget from the draft budgets. I also want to note that SACOG budget only includes or reflect revenues that is related to SACOG operations. It does not include majority of the transportation funding that are passed through to directly programmed to the member jurisdictions. In exceptions to a few pass-through grant, which I will talk a little bit more in detail a little bit. And also, the board action today does not include the approval of the CVR SAFE budgets. The CVR board will take action on that at its May meeting. So here's just a quick highlight, some of the major changes that is included in the final budget from the draft budget. The final budget reflects additional pass-through revenue of approximately $2.5 million. As you may heard, SACOG region was recently awarded $22.5 million from the Department of Transportation related to the Green Means Go program. Because this funding is a multi-year award, so the final budget and OWP for fiscal year 2024-25 only reflect $2.3 million of the revenues. The remaining revenue will be programmed into SACOG budget in the future years, and as noted, that majority of these funding will be passed through to member jurisdictions. Also included in the final budget is a pass-through revenue of $339,000 for Yuba Sutter Transit due to some limitation for YST to contract directly with Caltrans. So SACOG is going to be administering that fund and then pass through to the to YST. The final budget also includes just some minor adjustment to other revenue due to some reallocation or adjustment to staff hour that is allocated to different projects. My apology. We did receive comments back from Caltrans and federal agency, and we were able to incorporate those into the final document that is included in the staff item. However, there is no fiscal impact to the budgets, just minor updates to the OWP and budgets. For more information, in attachment L is the comments that were received and also SACOG responses to those comments. And also just to, those comments are included in the final OWP document. Just want to do a quick overview of the total revenue that is reflected in the fiscal year 2024-25 budget. Total budget is $37.6 million, an increase of $2.8 million comparing to the draft budgets. As noted, mainly this is due to the two new pass-through grant that we just recently received, is programmed into the final budget. Federal revenue makes up 37% of the total revenue. This includes federal planning funds for SACOG. What also includes the one-time race grant, some of the also other grants that are received from the federal government. State revenue makes up 46% of the overall total budget revenue. Again, this is mainly related to the REAP 1 housing and also the Green Means Go funding from the state. Local and other revenue makes up the remaining 17% of the total revenue. Again, total revenue for the fiscal year that is proposed in the final budget is $37.6 million. Just a quick overview of the total expenditures by categories. Total expenditure for the fiscal year is $41.3 million, an increase of $2.9 million compared to the draft budgets. Again, this is also related to the two new grant award that is included in the final budget that is related to the Green Means Go and also the Yuba Transit Pass-Through Fund. Staff costs makes up approximately 33% of the total budget expenditures. Consulting cost is approximately 12% or $5 million. Pass-through costs was about $18.2 million. This is mainly related to the REAP housing, also the Green Means Go from both federal and state that are part of that percentage there. Other costs makes up the remaining 11% of the budget. Total budget that is proposed in the final budget is $41.3 million. With the projected revenue and expenditures, staff is proposing using $3.7 million of the reserve and unassigned fund balance to cover the shortfall of the budget. This includes $245,000 that is reserve and restrict fund, that including the board and advocacy of $200,000, and also include $900,000 of the unassigned fund balance. Part of that is due to some of the expenditures that was deferred from 2023-24 budget due to the timing of those expenditures that is not happening in the current fiscal year, so it will be deferred into the fiscal year 24-25. And then also to cover staff costs that is related to the EEI program, and also one-time consulting costs that is related to the Blueprint Environmental Impact Report. Staff has also proposed using SACOG Managed Fund, which includes board previously approved use of the SACOG Managed Fund of approximately $1.3 million for the community design projects, the cash match for the RACE grant, and also partial funding for the EEI program, totaling approximately $1.3 million. Because of timing of those expenditures, staff is programming the appropriate amount based on the expenditure budgeted for the fiscal year. The remaining of those committed funds will be programmed into future budget cycle. Included in the final budget, staff has also proposed a loan to Capital Area Regional Tolling Authority, also known as CARTA, of $1.3 million. In February, the CARTA Board designated SACOG to be the administering agency for its operations, and then also SACOG Board approved spending SACOG funds on some initial support of establishing CARTA. Since CARTA does not have a source of revenue, staff is proposing to loan $1.3 million of the SACOG Managed Fund to be repaid to SACOG with interest. A draft agreement between SACOG and CARTA and also a promissory note is included as an attachment J in the package. Staff is currently working on the 5-year forecast and also the policy for the managed fund, so that will be bring back to the board for discussion later this year. So in summary, the fiscal year 2024-25 budget includes total expenditures of $41.3 million, which includes staff costs of $13.7 million, regional project and pass-through costs of $18.9 million, and consulting and other costs of $8.7 million, totaling $41.3 million for fiscal year 24-25. Estimated revenue is $37.6 million, and with the use of assigned and unassigned fund balance of $3.7 million. This concludes the presentation for the item. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Loretta. I appreciate it. Do we have any questions or comments? Seeing none. Do we have any public comments?
There's no public comment.
Right. Bring it back then. We'll close public comment. Bring it back to the board for any discussion or for a motion.
Galdo moves approval.
Thank you.
Second by Baines.
Yeah, right.
Thank you both. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
All right, passes. Thank you, Loretta.
Thank you.
Appreciate it, all the hard work. Okay. All right, moving on to item 13. This is on Senate Bill 125 transit funding allocation, and Christina has this item for us. Good morning,
Hi.
Christina.
Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to talk about the SB 125 allocation plan, which is the second that we are going to be doing here. So just a quick refresher, SB 125 was legislation passed in 2023, which is meant to be bridge funding for transit operators to kind of fill some of the fiscal cliff issues that we have been hearing about in the last few years since the pandemic. In essence, it was designed to minimize service impacts or reductions, maintain existing ridership levels, and develop a long-term financial sustainability plan. It is not meant to, however, be a long-term funding source for transit operators. There are two areas or fund areas that are providing the SB 125 money. TIRCP program, which is the Transit and Intercity Rail program, and the ZETCP, which is a zero emission transit capital program. In total, over the course of the program, SACOG will be receiving $238 million and some change to distribute to our transit operators in the region. In December, we did our first allocation plan, and we focused the allocation on capital needs. This was in part due to the short time frame that we had to turn around the required reporting, but also those were some significant needs that we had been hearing from our partners. So we had distributed $45.6 million to SAC-RT, YOLO TD, and SACOG ourselves for administration of program. 44 million of that is contingent upon the award of grants. So $44 million of that 45.6 were grant matches for either a RAISE grant or a TIRCIP Cycle 7 grant. So if those grants are not awarded, that funding will go back into the pot for use in a later allocation plan by any of the operators in the region. It doesn't stay tied to the operator that got the original request. Our current allocation strategy is focused on operations. So as I mentioned, we've been hearing increasing need from some of our transit operators that they're having larger deficits in their funding plans and budgets. And so it was time to address some of that. SACOG looked at two different options, both of which are on your screen, and there's probably a clearer table in your staff report if you're able to look at it. The difference between these two options is that in option one, $20 million would be returned to the pot that had to do with two previous SAC-RT awards from contingent grants, kind of taking a different strategy on how to address those. That would allow the 60.26, I think is the number, $60.6 million operating deficit that SAC-RT had identified to us, allow that to be fully funded. Option two does not make that assumption of the $20 million returning back to the pot, and so therefore the SAC-RT operating deficit would not be fully filled. That's kind of the single main difference between those two strategies. Both of them would fund fully the YOLO TD anticipated operating deficit, which is just over $3 million, and would also provide $10.2 million to Yuba Sutter Transit to fill the gap for their next gen transit facility, which is a capital project. That's sort of the exception to this. It also would allocate the remaining $1.9-ish million to SACOG for administration of SB 125. This is really important for us because we are required to do not just oversight of the program, but there's a lot of reporting and monitoring, and there is the need to do a long-range financial sustainability plan that looks at all of the operators in our region to give us an understanding of how, once this money is no longer here, what our operators are going to be looking like and how they're going to fix their operating needs and deficits. Really important with this, with both of these, back to the December allocation plan, we did give some planning money to both YOLO TD and SAC-RT to do a long-range transit plan for SAC-RT and a short-range transit plan for YOLO TD. The intention of that is so that they can take a look at their operating deficits and figure out a strategy to start minimizing their anticipated deficits for the next 2-ish years and beyond, so that we can minimize the deficits and not have to continue to just fill a gap. We need to kind of see some progress in this area to get to that long-term financial sustainability. So our recommendation, after all of our discussions with our partners, our transit partners, is to move forward with option one. With the really important point being that we have strong expectations that that long-range transit plan and the short-range transit plans will be started within the near term, so that by the time we start looking at the next allocation plans, there's progress moving forward in ways to minimize future operating deficits. While this is intended to fill operating gaps, it's not intended to just be a stopgap measure that when this funding is gone, we're kind of back to square one. So we would really like to kind of take a look at some financial efficiencies that could be had with our transit operators in growing deficits. So we are recommending option one for this. We had a meeting a few weeks ago with the Transportation Committee. They also recommended unanimously that option one be the recommendation to the board. We did decide to make this an action item instead of go on the consent because we anticipated there might be some discussion on this. So we are still going to move forward with the recommendation of option one, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Christina. Do we have any questions from board members? Yes, Director Branscombe.
Thank you. What is the extent in making these allocations? What is the extent of SACOG's discretion in making the allocations? I tried to read SB 125. It's impenetrable. But I picked up the theme, and yes, operations, and we don't want to see ridership reduced or services reduced. I understand all that. But within that, what is the scope of discretion that you've been acting on in making this recommendation? I've got follow-up questions.
Sure. There really is no limitations on how the RTPA administers the funds. We have some partners across the state that are not using any for operating and dedicating it all to capital, and we have some that are taking a blended approach like we are. I think what it is it depends on the environment in which the transit operators are in the current time that you're doing the allocation, but there's no specific, you have to use it for this or you have to use it for that.
Understand. The follow-up is that I recall at the Transit Committee meeting, I'd asked one of the senior representatives from SAC-RT if they had had this kind of deficit in prior years immediately preceding the upcoming fiscal year. And the answer was no. Well, that's troubled me ever since the meeting. I've given that deeper thought. So you've got SB 125 and all this money pops up. So the question is, and this might sound like an accusation, but it's a reasonable question, I think, given the facts. Did SAC-RT increase the expense side of their upcoming operating budget in order to harvest the SB 125 money? And if so, does that have any impact on how we allocate? Because if indeed they've been going along like this, then all of a sudden the expenses are up like this, and they're going to be covered by SB 125 per the recommendation. Well, SB 125 doesn't go on forever.
Right.
And so if there is this increase, it could lead to some sort of budget calamity when the SB 125 money goes away.
I can't speak to SAC-RT's budget, so they are here if you would like them to come up and answer that question, if that's
Please,
helpful.
thank you.
Hello, Jason Johnson, CFO at SAC-RT. So to respond to that question once more regarding the deficit, my response was that we did not have a deficit in those prior years. The way we view a deficit is when you get, as you're going through the budget process, if you do not or cannot identify revenues to cover all the expenditures that you're budgeting for, that's when a deficit would exist and you would be looking to draw down on surplus funds at that time. Or if you're through, or if you're already into an operating year and then you are experiencing once again where revenues do not meet the expenditures for that year, then a deficit occurs. More so, we're looking at those as budget shortfalls as we're going through the process. So in the prior years, we've had federal funds that were available, specifically a lot of the COVID relief funds each year. And those federal funds total anywhere from $50 to $60 million each year. So that may be the deficit or the amount that you're looking for. overall, it's not significantly increasing year over year. And we're not trying to harvest SB 125 by inflating our expenditures in this year.
But so the COVID funds have covered about the 50 million, which is approximately what you're getting.
Correct.
And now, so those are extraordinary funds. I mean, they're not run-of-the-mill funds, not to be expected every year. And now, right behind that, we have SB 125 funds that are going to sort of make up for that, correct?
Correct.
What happens when those run out? How are you going to manage your business knowing that at some point there's going to be a cliff to a substantial amount of funding coming your way?
So in part, as we're partnering with SACOG, going through the process of the comprehensive operational analysis, that will help identify some of the methodologies we might use at that point. And also prior to the COVID relief funds, before this entire situation occurred, we'd been using other federal funds to bridge any gaps that were occurring that other local funds or state funds weren't covering. So we had shifted a number of those funds to capital for the last several years to cover those needs. Those funds could then be shifted back in the future to help reduce the gap that exists.
Okay, this is 78 million for operating expenditures, correct?
Correct.
So what is the total operating expenditure budget coming up in 24-25?
Right now, I believe we're at about 260 million, 260 to 265
So this is 25%.
approximately.
Well,
Little
you're in
more.
a precarious situation. It just seems that the real question that Christina spoke to and SACOG staff has been studying is long-term, how are you going to make it? And
Director Branson, can I just make a couple
Please,
comments here?
please.
So as this board knows, and you're going to be looking at a discussion scenario for the long-range plan, we need a healthy and robust transit network across all 6 counties. This allocation is for 4. And SAC-RT will remind you and us often, they carry about 90% of all the riders in the 6-county region. And so when you see deficits, you're going to naturally see bigger ones come out of SAC-RT because they have a lot more riders. Having said that, because we need a healthy, financially sound, all of our transit operators, this has been a really tough few years. Yes, the COVID and the CARES Act money covered some of that. Yes, there is a deficit now in this upcoming fiscal year. And I think you're asking the question that we all need to work on together. And as Jason just said, we're going to be working with SAC-RT. Your allocation of $1 million in December from these very same funds will allow us to look into that and I think come back to the board. So it is an opportunity. We've certainly heard you and others, right? We want to help. We want to understand what is the medium to long-term strategy in this region for all of our operators, because we're going to have other deficits. They may look smaller for smaller operators, but they're going to be there. So I think it's a very fair question. The allocation, the action before you today, at least keep SAC-RT whole for this next fiscal year. But we will absolutely, and I know this board is really interested, to come back to you across all the operators for transit services and how, the question is, how are they financially sound and healthy?
This micro problem with respect to SAC-RT, when I voted yes at the Transit Committee meeting, and I'll vote yes again, it's on the strength of the faith I have in SACOG staff working with SAC-RT to work that long-term problem. Otherwise, if you're shooting in the dark and you're saying, well, we're just going to go like this and hope that something comes in at the back end that covers it, it might not. And you've got the macro issue, the state deeply in debt. I mean, it's running huge deficits, and the federal government operating huge deficits. There's going to be, at some point, I can't imagine that there will still be the outflow of funds across the board that we're seeing right now. And so I hope you all put that, keep that in mind when you work your budgets out long-term. You've got a real problem coming.
Yes, Director Bradford.
Yeah, so through the chair. So first, I appreciate seeing the allocation to Ubesetter Transit in this. I know that's important, and I'm supportive of the allocation to RT as well. I know how important that is to continue providing those services. In our packet, we also had a letter from Valley Rail, which I understand, given the conversation we just had around what our current transit operators are facing, I understand it's a challenging thing to bring up, but I think that you know, that addition to our region is just extremely important for our long-term goals as well. And so I'm very supportive. I know in this round, there's no room, but I feel like we need to ensure that we're doing all we can to meet their request moving forward, maybe in the next round. And if there's anything that you can recommend we do to kind of help them secure additional funding, I'm very, very supportive of that.
Great. Yes, Director Gallardo.
You. Can you go back to the screen? Because the one that shows how, who's getting what? How's that? And I think that's the question I have is, how did you determine which RT services would be, or which regions would be getting what for there?
Basically, we were able to give everybody what they asked for. We did not have to make any very difficult decisions in order to be able to fund Yuba Sutter Transit, SAC-RT, YOLO TD, and then allocate the administrative funding for ourselves.
Okay, so this was, you put out and said, give us your request, what is needed to do that?
Yes. Our operators are required to submit to us what their needs are. It was a little bit more difficult in the first time. In December, we did have to make some decisions on what we would fund. This time, given the amount of money that was available after December, we were able to fully fund the requests that were given to us.
And do we have any idea about the grant status?
We are awaiting those. We have not received the determination yet from the federal government or any of I don't think the TRSIP Cycle 7s have been submitted yet. The only one that was submitted was a RAISE grant, and I think we should be hearing in May or June on that.
And if I could ask Mr. Johnson a question on ridership numbers. One of the things you said on here is the operating funds is to maintain, and so that you're not cutting routes. And I think it said and increase. What have your ridership numbers been like for the last few years and where you're at now?
So there was a dip post-COVID or during COVID, but we've actually seen our bus ridership come back to about 100% pre-COVID numbers. And our light rail, I believe, is in the 80 percentile range. So it's gradually, we see improvements month after month. So it is gradually increasing.
Can you tell me about what your numbers are?
I don't have specifics on that. I can provide you that information offline.
I think it'd be helpful. Thank you.
I'll go to Vice Chair Soon and then.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to thank staff for the presentation, and I'm supportive of staff's recommendation, but I just wanted to echo sentiments of Director Bradford. We got to do everything we can to leverage federal dollars, and recognizing we have planned rail stations in Elk Grove and Sacramento that will benefit the region by linking us all to the Bay Area. Whatever we can do when it is strategically appropriate, I would appreciate also the reservation of funds that will allow San Joaquin Rail to leverage federal dollars. Thank you.
Director Guerrero.
Thank you. And there's a couple of things, of variables that I would like us to also take into consideration that I'm hearing would help SAC-RT and other regional public transportation systems. First, Major League Baseball is coming to town. So I'd like us to be able to coordinate an approach to be able to, to see what we can project to make sure we're ramping up and providing kind of like the robust stability for that in preparation for the Major League Baseball coming into town. And also, on a smaller scale, I'm hearing that there is a push to bring in state employees back in 2 days a week. And I don't know what that may add as far as assistance in being able to build more ridership opportunities. So if there's publicity opportunities, because I know that if people bring in a car, they have to pay for a monthly pass. Mm-hmm. But if we can take a look at ways to boost ridership in that venue, working with the state, maybe that's another way to approach it. Thank you.
Directors, if I can, it is absolutely true. The mics pick you up, but if it's a little further away from you, I think it's a little harder to hear yes. Okay. So just pull it a little bit closer, but I think we got what you said, Director.
Thank you, Director. Any other, yes.
Oh, I just have a couple comments here. I'd certainly be very interested in hearing what the latest ridership numbers are, and the relationship of the revenue versus where this is going. It sounds to me like this is kind of a money tree. And today the branch is SB 125. Next year, the branch will be some other fund. but at some point, the fruit gets higher and higher up of the tree until it's eventually gone. So I think we need to really look back and see what reasonable measures can we take now to prevent us from having to go farther and farther up the tree and it becomes less and less sparse. So that's my only comment. I'll certainly vote to support this, but it's very concerning to me.
Any other comments? Yes, Director Thomas.
I'd just like to reiterate what I'm hearing from this board. I'm hearing that there is support for this, recognizing that our SACOG staff is going to be working with SAC-RT to address this. But I'd just like to reiterate that what I'm hearing is that infusions of significant funding is always a tremendous opportunity that can't be taken for granted. And that ideally SB 125 would be used for significant high priority capital projects that would allow this region to take advantage of some of the opportunities that I'm hearing around this board. And that we want to reiterate that one-time money cannot be used as a long-term sustainability plan. But just like my colleague suggested, we have faith that the partners can come together to figure this out. But I think I'm just hearing the board that we have concerns about that. Can't be a financial stability plan. We understand that it's needed right now, but that ideally we want to use this major money to move this region forward.
Well said. Any other comments? All right, we're going to go ahead to open up public comments on this item, and Mr. Allison, Dan Allison will be the first.
Good morning, board members. My name is Dan Allison, and for this agenda item, I'm representing Sacramento Transit Advocates and Riders, which is one of the several transit advocacy organizations in the region. We support the allocation of SB 125 funds to operations for SAC-RT. And we support it because the program includes a comprehensive operations analysis. We are concerned that SAC-RT does not have a sustainable business plan. The programs that SAC-RT runs, there's a lot of money going to some that don't have a big return in ridership and less money going to those that do have a big return in ridership. So we have the same concerns that many of you have. However, we do support the funding plan. And we look very much forward to seeing the outcome of the comprehensive operations analysis. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Allison. Ms. Ham is next, Laura Ham.
Good morning, directors. Thank you. I'm Laura Ham. I'm the Vice President of Planning, Grants, and Procurement at Sacramento Regional Transit. My colleague Jason has already spoke, so I will be brief. But I would like to thank SACOG staff and the members of the Transportation Committee for their support regarding the allocation of SB 125 funding and the recommendation, including the $60 million in operating assistance for SAC-RT and the $12 million in funding for critical capital projects. We would also like to acknowledge the California Transit Association that led this SB 125 effort to assist California transit agencies as they addressed anticipated funding shortfalls through fiscal year 2028. We have submitted a letter of support and would like to reiterate SAC-RT's support for option 1 that will fund operating shortfalls as intended by the SB 125 legislation to preserve ridership to transit-dependent populations, as well as funding gaps in key capital projects. So I would like to share some brief background about SAC-RT and our diverse rider profile and the funding, how this funding will support SAC-RT's ridership. So SAC-RT is the largest multimodal transit provider, carrying over 90% of riders in the 6-county capital region. And to answer your question regarding our ridership, pre-COVID in 2019, we were carrying about 22 million riders. This year, we're on track for around 17 million riders. We operate over 82 bus routes, 43 miles of light rail serving 53 stations, and complementary ADA paratransit service as well. We offer one of the largest and most successful on-demand microtransit services in the nation, and the first system-wide fare-free program in the nation to over 300,000 students in kindergarten through 12th grade. We're on track to provide 4 million student rides this year. We reduce 156 million miles in VMT and 24 million pounds of CO2 each year. Communities of color make up 68% of SAC-RT's riders.
1 minute.
The majority of our riders are transit dependent, with 67% of SAC-RT riders without access to a personal automobile and 56% from low-income households. 1/3 of our riders make less than $10,000 a year. The primary trip purpose on SAC-RT is transportation to work and school. We know that the long-term financial sustainability and health of SAC-RT is vital to our community, and we're grateful for the allocation of funding that will allow SAC-RT to complete a comprehensive operational analysis and a long-range plan that will be further focused on efficiency, transportation equity, sustainability, and ridership building. I want to thank SACOG for this recommendation and the ongoing support of the SACOG staff, and we look forward to working closely with them on implementation. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Autumn Bernstein.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. Autumn Bernstein, I'm the Executive Director of the YOLO Transportation District. Thank you very much for considering our request for $3 million to fully fill the operating gap that we have projected. Like most transit operators, we are facing a fiscal cliff that's been brought on by the pandemic, the changes in work from home. We are excited that hopefully people are going to start coming back to downtown Sacramento. We think that will help us a lot, help our ridership. And we're also facing increasing costs for everything that we do, whether it's just buying tires for the buses, purchasing gas, et cetera. We're all experiencing the impacts of inflation. We published our five-year financial forecast in May 2023 that projected this deficit. To give you a sense, our budget's about $25 million a year annually, depending on capital costs, and we expect our deficit to grow to about $6 million a year. But for this year, this fiscal year coming up, it's around $3 million, and that is the reflection of those one-time funds going away. So we know we have a structural problem, and we are working on identifying long-term solutions. I've been talking to you a lot recently about toll lanes and toll revenue. We think that is hopefully part of the solution. We also just signed a contract with a consultant for a short-range transit plan to look forward and look at different financial scenarios and what it's going to cost us to continue our service going forward. So we don't have the answers right now, but we are working on it. We are very supportive of SACOG staff doing that analysis and deep dive into the finances of our agency and other agencies, because we know that transparency is key, and we know that we can't find the long-term solutions unless we really fully identify and are open about what the problems are. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Autumn. Michael Barnbaum's next.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Hope everybody had a great cap-to-cap trip that went. Heard from some people it was fantastic, and thank you for going and representing everyone throughout the region. I want to talk about the item, but one of the things that transit agencies are going to be grappling with, and hasn't been touched on a lot, but as you've heard, has been their operating costs and their operating deficits. But there's also a think outside the box approach. And I want to give you this example. It's called cost sharing agreements. It's not used too much, but there are some really excellent examples in this region. One of them that Director Suen would be familiar with in Elk Grove is the SAC-RT Route 137. That is a cost-sharing agreement with UC Davis Health. Every trip operated to UC Davis Health from Elk Grove is covered by UC Davis Health. The transit operator does not put one penny into the operation of that route. Another example is a potential one. The Valley Rail Airport shuttle from the Natomas Rio Linda station is a concept. That once Valley Rail goes in there would be a shuttle to the airport, but it would be a cost-sharing agreement involving the San Joaquin Regional Rail Commission and San Joaquin Joint Powers Authority. And then here's another one, which I personally put a submission of proposal in. Batter up. The proposed Sacramento Ballpark shuttle. would not be funded by the transit operator, either YOLO TD or SAC-RT, but identifiable entities could possibly include
1 minute.
cities of Sacramento, West Sacramento, County of Yolo, County of Sacramento, Greater Sacramento Economic Council, Sacramento Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce, SACOG, Sacramento Basketball Holdings Incorporated, led by Vivek Ranadive, who also owns the River Cats, and Athletics Investment Group, owned by John Fisher, along with Visit Sacramento, could all be involved at the table at the River City Stadium Financing Authority, which even the ticket buyers would pay $1 ticket fee toward the operation of the shuttle, along with a $1 ticket fee for preventative maintenance of the facility, similar to what is in place today for ticket buyers at events at Golden One Center. So there's a think outside and inside the box approach, considering cost sharing agreements. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Do we have any other comments on item 13? All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and close public comments, and just want to thank everybody for the comments this morning. RT and YTD, thank you for also acknowledging the challenges that lie ahead. I appreciate that, and as well as for my board colleagues, I think also express those concerns from a board perspective, and knowing that we have to look at innovative ways going forward in order to do things. So with that, are there any other questions of staff on this item? Seeing none, any further discussion?
Move staff recommendation, Kennedy.
Second, Baines.
Thank you both. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you all. Thank you for the comments this morning.
Chair Saragosa?
Yes.
As we tee up the next item, I just want to try to connect a couple of dots on what you just talked about and other things that are on today's agenda or coming in the next 6 to 12 months. We talk about transit ridership, right? And you heard in our long-range plan, and our last long-range plan, the one before that, we need healthy transit networks and we need more ridership. And part of the way we do that is speed and reliability. So when we talk about bus rapid transit, even when we talk about managed lanes, that's about making sure we have a network that can get people places quicker and is competitive with the auto. The other ways you can think about this, and you will have to think about them in the long-range plan coming up, is you can either bring transit to people or you can bring people to transit. Bringing transit to people looks like a lot of extensions, light rail extensions. They are not cheap. And they are not that affordable in the budget that we have coming up. Or we can bring people to transit, which means building more housing along transit corridors and bus corridors. And so when we talk about your projections, we talk about Green Means Go, and we talk about infill, we're going to have, is it 20%? Is it 30%? Is it 40%? That commitment is about building in transit ridership, building it in. It's one of the cheapest, it's long-term and hard, but in the long term, it's one of the most effective strategies we have. And I look at Director Vang and Stone Beatland, right on the light rail there. There's a lot of opportunities through Green Means Go and our infill. It's yes about shorter trips and achieving our greenhouse gas goals, but it is also about having a more sustainable transit system in the long term. Thanks.
Thank you, James. So we will move on to our information items, and item number 14, which is our Mobility Zones program overview. And Kathleen has this item for us.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Saragosa. Good morning. I'm very excited to be presenting item 14 to you. I'm Kathleen Hanley. I'm a principal planner on the transportation team here at SACOG. And this information item will provide you an overview of one of the big new projects that the transportation team has started here at SACOG. I want to start by talking a bit about where this board has been on the issue of mobility zones. So back in March 2023, the board took an action accepting a $5 million federal Rebuilding American Infrastructure with Sustainability and Equity, or RAISE, grant that was awarded to us for the Mobility Zones program. Later that year, the board took action adopting a carbon reduction strategy for federal Formula Carbon Reduction Program funds, including prioritizing implementation of the Mobility Zones program for future use of those carbon reduction program funds. Continuing through 2023, staff worked with the federal government to get grant agreements in place, hire the consulting and project management team, which will include some of the other speakers who are going to join me today providing you this project overview, and move towards kicking off the project officially in January of this year. Today's presentation really focuses on where we're going from here. So we're really at the initial phase of starting this project, which will continue over 3 years through 2026. This initial part of the project is funded by that RAISE grant. And then once the project program has been overviewed by those initial years, we'll have some implementation work that will continue ongoing by the SACOG transportation team. So the purpose of today's presentation is just to give you all an overview of what you can expect in this program over the coming years, but I'll be returning with various milestones as we reach decision points in the project. At a high level, I want to talk about the purpose of mobility zones as it relates to SACOG's goals. The program has sort of 2 purposes, one that's internal related to SACOG as an organization and our racial equity action plan goals, and the other is about the Sacramento region and our goals regarding sustainable transportation, mobility, and accessibility for our residents. Internally with SACOG as an organization, the industry of transportation has had sort of a varied past with how well we've done with incorporating community voices and engagement in our transportation plans and programs. SACOG's had some great recent examples where we've been doing much more robust engagement and partnership with community-based organizations. But the Mobility Zones project will really look at creating a sustainable framework for how we can engage members of the community and community leaders in SACOG's ongoing work, a model that other SACOG programs and projects could take into account. So we're testing out, sort of piloting this different model that involves community committees that my colleague David will talk in more detail about later in the presentation. So in addition to the sort of internal organizational purpose of the Mobility Zones project, it's really aimed at trying to increase the accessibility of sustainable modes of transportation without sacrificing economic prosperity for different communities in our region. A lot of times I hear this board sort of struggle with the issue, including some of the discussions we've had today about how we, increase the amount of trips that are taken in a sustainable way without limiting how much folks have access to the jobs, the places they want to go, the places they want to live. And so Mobility Zones will use sort of a place-based and case study approach to really dig into some of the communities in our region and understand what kinds of projects will help move the needle on our region-wide goals while also advancing economic opportunity. The project's really related to a lot of other major projects and programs that you've heard about here at SACOG board. So I want to quickly tie those connections for you all as we head into more detailed information about the scope of this project. First is on the Engage, Empower, Implement grant program. So the Engage, Empower, Implement, or EEI program is really focused on similarly facilitating relationships with community-based organizations and facilitating community co-creation in planning. The key difference between EEI and the Mobility Zones program is that EEI is a grant program by which SACOG gives money to our member jurisdictions and community-based organizations to do this work. And Mobility Zones is SACOG sort of taking its own advice in this category and running a co-creation planning model itself. On the relationship with the blueprint, I want to be really clear that the blueprint conversation that you are going to have later today and ongoing throughout this year is really the process where the goals for housing, greenhouse gases, and VMT are set for this region. And so what Mobility Zones will do is say, okay, the blueprint has decided at a 10,000 foot, 6-county level what we see this region needs to meet the targets that have been set. What does that mean for various particular communities? What does it mean for a suburban community? What does it mean for a rural community? And how can we make more specific recommendations in the future that are really context specific to how diverse our region is? There's also a lot of relationship between the Mobility Zones project and Green Means Go. They're both a really place-based approach that zeroes in on particular areas to advance our regional goals. The key differences between Mobility Zones and Green Means Go is that Green Means Go is housing focused, while Mobility Zones is a transportation project. And the other difference is that Green Means Go green zones, which are for infill, were identified by the cities and counties where those zones are, who said, as the land use entities said, this is the area that we think makes the most sense for infill in our community. Whereas the Mobility Zones geographic areas will be identified using a data-driven process collaboratively with the cities and counties, but also with regional agencies and members of the community. So with all that overview, I'm happy to hand it over to my consulting project manager, Emily.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. Hello. My name is Emily Alter, and I'm an associate with STEER. And as Kathleen mentioned, I am the project manager for the consulting team on this project. I'm going to give you a little bit more detail today on the project scope and give you a high-level overview of the project schedule so you can better understand how we achieve some of those ambitious objectives that Kathleen laid out. So the first step in the Mobility Zones project is establishing goals and setting a vision for the project, and then identifying the associated criteria to assess those goals and ensure that the project is advancing the goals it sets out to achieve. And so what we're doing right now is co-creating those goals with regional agencies, cities and counties, and most importantly, those community members that Kathleen spoke to. Once we've identified those goals and the criteria to evaluate them, we will then go into the zone establishment portion of the project. And those zones will be established by analyzing equity, accessibility, quality of life, and deliverability criteria to identify those neighborhood scale zones throughout the SACOG region that will really advance and have the most pronounced mobility needs and opportunities. We will catalog the conditions we identify through that quantitative process that Kathleen spoke to when establishing those zones. We'll then move into a project prioritization process. So we're going to co-create sort of a list of potential projects for each of the 15 identified mobility zones with community members, with regional agencies, with cities and counties to ensure that we're identifying those projects that can really get at the core mobility needs that have been identified. We'll then apply the criteria that we've identified to prioritize projects with the goal of identifying an early action project that will be moved through to early implementation. So that high priority project will be something that's implementable, but also will have impact in achieving the goals that we've identified. So that last part of the project is really going to be advancing those early action projects. For those other projects that we've seen as high priority, but that may not move into that early action project period, we will identify implementation toolkits, which will include funding sources, partner agencies, and the critical next steps to implement the other projects identified. So in terms of a schedule, it is a 2.5-year planning process. We are in the first phase now doing the goal setting and criteria development, which will go through about the fall of this year. At that time, we'll get into analyzing the conditions throughout the region to identify the zones, and we hope to have the zones identified by about spring of 2025. We'll then get into the project development phase and the project prioritization with the aim of having some of the early action projects discussed at the end of 2025, early 2026. We'll then go into implementation of the early action projects. I just want to note, you'll see on the schedule along the bottom is ongoing committee and community engagement. You're going to hear a little bit more about what that looks like shortly, but there will be engagement throughout the entire length of the project, including regular quarterly meetings with key stakeholders. And with that, I'll hand it over to David.
Hello, my name is David Moore. Let's bring this a little bit. David Moore, I'm the Community Planning Specialist here with Civic Thread. I am co-managing this project with my colleague, Catherine Canepa. Let's also shift this slide here. The engagement scope, as Emily mentioned, does address the municipal committee as well as a technical committee. We are engaged with those individuals. I am here to speak to you about the community committee and what community engagement is going to look like and prioritize throughout this process. It can be identified into two groups. The one on the left there is kind of the community committee, right? Partner organization to what would be municipal and technical committees. These are designed to acknowledge and address that each county has its own unique set of values, barriers, cultural identities, and each county will have its own committee to help us address those unique characteristics, excuse me, of each county. The other side of this is kind of the localized community engagement. This is the broader, open to all community engagement. We're going out into the community across the 6 counties with kind of complementary advice, insight, and contributions from the community committee themselves of where that should take place and what that engagement can look like to most address or to most effectively address the counties themselves. We have talked about equity throughout this presentation, you've heard about it in relation to this project, and you will continue to. I want to acknowledge that equity across the 6 counties is going to vary. We are not approaching this with a blanket definition of what equity is. We are using the community committees, the municipal, the technical committees to better understand and identify how equity can be addressed specific to each county and community. With that, we have our engagement schedule. Again, this is high level and touches a little bit on what Emily already addressed, but Phase 1 is going to take place from April 2024 to about June 2025. That is kind of our zone establishment. We are not approaching this with any preconceived notions. The committees that we've established and the engagement we will do will help us identify the metrics, the criteria, how we're going to evaluate setting up mobility zones, and then using the additional time to establish the zones themselves. We'll then move into Phase 2, which is the project development, again, with community, municipal, and technical input on what projects are going to address the challenges, the barriers within each of those mobility zones that have been set up in Phase 1. And then ultimately, we will end September 2026 with both a robust number of projects, also selected high priority projects for immediate implementation. And with that, I'll open it up to any questions and discussions and hand it back to Kathleen.
All right. Thank you all for the presentation this morning. I'll go ahead. Yes, Director Branscombe.
Thank you. I heard so much about process. I wanted to, we get to the end game, and the end game is priority projects. Can you give us some examples of what what projects might look like? Because again, there was a lot of discussion of process, but what are these projects going to be?
Sure. So I think I'm at the beginning stages, so I'll know better as I come back to you with future presentations and we move through the project. I know where the zones are and what the priorities of those communities are, but absolutely. In general, we're expecting these to be relatively small scale. The things that make the difference for individual members of the community in terms of how they get around their particular area. So projects could include anything from repaving, sidewalks, crosswalks, bus shelters, relatively small scale project. That's not to say that a community member and folks within a particular area couldn't prioritize something larger scale, but we're really looking at the more of the smaller day-to-day projects.
Thank you. Thank
you. Good morning. I apologize if it was in some of the attachments. I wasn't able to pull up a couple of the attachments, but I want to see, how are you engaging with the El Dorado County Transportation Commission and Placer County Transportation Agency on this?
Sure. So actually, if my slides could get put back up, if you don't. Thanks.
And I'm sorry if I
No, you're totally fine. I had this as a backup slide. I just wasn't sure what y'all were going to be interested in today. So we have this robust series of committees. If you can go all the way down to slide 11, Katie, thank you. One more. Oh, I have it. Thank you. Okay, so if you look on the bottom left here, we have 3 types of committees that are engaged quarterly on this project. The first are community committees. Those include nonprofits and community leaders, community representatives from each of the counties. Then we have the municipal committee. That's the member agencies of SACOG, so your public works or community development staff, whoever makes the most sense from each of the cities and counties participate in those. And then we have a technical committee, which is made up of regional agencies that include entities like Placer County Transportation Planning Agency, El Dorado County Transportation Commission, also our transit operators, our air districts, PG&E, SMUD, like people who have a more wide-ranging multi-county kind of perspective on some of these transportation issues. So we get different feedback from the perspectives of those different committees.
Perfect. Sounds like very robust feedback. That's perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Director Thomas, can I go one step further? Because first of all, the RAISE grant, we were able to bring Kathleen Henley on as our project manager. So we're really thrilled to have Kathleen here. I think you've seen over the last 6 months.
She's terrific.
We put the grant in a while ago, actually with PCTPA and EDCTC. So not only are in that flow chart there, they were actually on the application, partly because, and I hope you've heard this, we really want to have this be a bottom-up effort to actually define kind of equity on local terms, right? It's going to look different in Placer County. You've educated us on this, and El Dorado County and Yuba County and everywhere else. So they really were excited to do this, and they were in on the ground floor for the opportunity.
And this is one of the reasons I love SACOG, because you do, bring all the parties together and look at the region comprehensively, and I greatly appreciate that.
Thank you. Kathleen and team, I just wanted to take this moment just to say thank you for the presentation. And I think all my colleagues agree that we need a more robust mobility network to really get folks to their location faster. And I really appreciate staffs and the consultants focus on equity, especially equity in various counties. I just want to mention, as we're talking about mobility, that we're also thinking about changing ridership behaviors, right? That's so key. James has shared, bringing transit to people is not cheap, or we can bring people to transit, building housing closer to light rail. I think it's actually a little bit of both, because we gotta be able to also ensure light rail to suburban areas like cities like Elk Grove. And so I just wanted to uplift as we talk about changing behaviors. And I want to uplift SAC-RT. I know that was a conversation on the last item, but they've implemented a really innovative program called Ride Free SAC-RT, which allows our young people to ride SAC-RT to get to school and work. And that's really important because it's about creating riders now and for the future, right? Pre-pandemic, SAC-RT had about 1.6 million youth riders. And this year we're projecting over 4 million riders, right? And so youth in particular makes up over almost 25% of ridership, right? And so talking about young people, I also just wanted to uplift and share suggestions as well. And I'm sure that the consultant has probably already thought through this, but just want to reaffirm on public record is that I think it'd be really great to also ensure that we get our Youth Leadership Academy with SACOG involved. I think it's really important to get young people involved in the engagement process. I know this from doing community organizing that if we're not intentional about actually holding meeting with young people, they're not going to show up to these listening sessions. No matter what county you go to, you put a listening session on, young people ain't going to show up. So it's really important to hold space for young people and be intentional about that. Because at the end, for us, this is like a win-win if you include young people, because we want to change their behaviors and get them to be future writers now and in the future. So, and just thank you so much for your hard work.
Absolutely happy to get that done, and we'll report on it at a future meeting.
Yes. Hi there. On the flip side, I just want to make sure I don't know what nonprofit.
Dressed up in the way to
Perfect.
go, Oscar.
Not the first time.
Yeah.
Probably not the last time. I'm thinking, I'm thinking, I'm thinking. Yes, I'm thinking.
It's an audio test, audio test. We have an audio test, just checking the audio. Apologies for the technical issues, everyone. Attention in the room, everyone. Attention in the room. The audio issues have been resolved. Audio issues have been resolved.
To the table.
If I could have your
All
attention in the
right, We
room.
are back in business, everybody. Sorry, you only got a short break there, everybody. I'll let everybody get back to their seats and then I will kick it back over to Director Villegas.
All right, thank you. Thank you again, Mr. Chair.
All
All
right,
right,
go
so
for it.
Chair, can I jump in real quick? Since we're streaming, I just want to let the public know if they're watching that we did pause the meeting when we found out the stream stopped. We didn't take any action or anything, so now we're back where we left off.
Thank you, Mr. Mauer.
All right, now I'm nervous about starting again. I'm gonna wait. Yeah, the pressure's on. All right, very quickly. So I'll just take 1 minute, very quickly, to just say, the Land Use Committee's had some really good, robust conversations, the most recent 2 weeks ago. We felt overall, generally speaking, and I think everybody can chime in a bit later, staff was very responsive to a lot of the questions that we had. They provided a lot more transparency, a lot more data. And in summary, a lot more other options for us to move forward. That was kind of the key essence of our discussion, was to ensure that this board had options to move forward, and staff has done that. Today's staff report responds to one specific request, and that was to really sort of lay out the time, not only the timeline, but also kind of how the decisions that this body has made over the course of the last couple of years, because there were questions that were coming up that was unclear as to how we landed on that specific sort of policy direction. And so today's staff report sort of provides sort of a timeline, sort of a historical perspective on decisions made, how the process that was used to get to where we are, and then the decisions yet to be determined by this body. So that was very helpful. In summary, the Lunar Committee only makes recommendations to this board. Its recommendation at this point is a single discussion scenario presented to you before you today, and it helps meet the primary goal of the greenhouse gas reduction target, which this board clearly said was a key priority. But it also provides some additional alternatives that also can meet the gas reduction target, so that we don't lose out on that key policy decision we made, which is not losing our transportation dollars. That's a non-starter. So I think what we discerned a couple of weeks ago was that today's meeting really does require, and I'm sure staff will speak about this, some clarity around kind of the next steps, so that they can meet their obligations for our next meeting in May, so we can make a final decision in June. I think I'm not speaking out of turn when I say that, but that we are under some obligation of a timeline in order to get the land use component done, so that staff can then in earnest start working on the transportation piece that'll dovetail in the blueprint planning documents that we're putting together. So today is critically important. And then I think what you were asking for maybe then is staff's presentation, and then other members of the committee, the Land Use Committee, can chime in if they have any other thoughts around the process that's gotten us to today. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Director Villegas, and thank you to the Lunar Committee for taking on this, being the sort of the tip of the spear on this discussion item and fleshing it out as we bring it back to the full board. So we appreciate that. With that, we will go ahead and kick it back over to Zach.
All right. We have.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I just have a quick comment, and I apologize. I was using the restroom in the break, so I came in a little late after Director Villegas began. One of the issues that came up, so if I'm repeating myself, tell me to stop. One of the issues that came up was a different type of option that looked at housing a little different. Did we discuss that? Okay, I just want to make sure we got that out there. Thanks.
Okay. Perfect. Okay, thank you. Good morning, members of the board. My name is Zach Miller. I'm the program manager for the 2025 Blueprint, the Metropolitan Transportation Plan and Sustainable Community Strategy. I'm here to provide an update on the 2025 Blueprint today. So this presentation is really going to focus on the development and the performance of a single set of land use and transportation assumptions, which we'll be referring to as the discussion scenario here today. And then today, as Director Villegas had alluded to, we're also going to be requesting that the board consider the options that you'll hear about in the presentation as it pertains directly to the land use assumptions for this plan, and provide staff with direction on how to proceed, keeping in mind that we're targeting June for a board action to adopt a single set of land use assumptions for this plan. So with that, I'll just jump into the agenda really quickly. So we're going to be starting out by providing background of the plan, the process, and the engagement that's been undertaken by staff over the last couple of years. Dov Caden will then discuss where we landed and how we got there as it relates to the discussion scenario. Then I'll be jumping back into the presentation to present how the discussion scenario performs across the triple bottom line and also relative to our greenhouse gas target for the region. And then finally, I'll be presenting the board with additional potential options for revisions to the land use assumptions as we move toward a board adoption of a single land use scenario in June. And with that, I'd like to pass it to Executive Director James Corliss for a few comments.
All right, it's a true team approach on this presentation. And as I did at the Land Use Committee, and I hope this is helpful, I just wanted to provide almost like the 50,000 foot level on this before we go back down to the details. So 5 things I want to just remind all the board, because you had a big packet with a lot of information in there. I know it was a lot to get through. So 5 things I want to just remind everybody about what this is. And what it projects. So again, the good news, the very good news is you have a discussion scenario in front of you that is within striking distance of the greenhouse gas target. As Director Villegas said, you also have a couple of options that the board has asked for that you have in front of you. That discussion scenario, I just want to remind everybody, as you'll hear, calls for about 1/3 of our future growth in developing communities, AKA greenfield communities. And the actual number is in a higher annual production in those greenfields. So you don't have a discussion scenario in front of you that sort of shuts off any of that. You have about 1/3, which is about what the original blueprint called for and what was in your last plan. So typically, I mean, generally speaking, this is really, again, however the board decides to go with these alternatives. And I think Director Sander has said this several times in his role now in the National League of Cities and going around the country. This region is known for the 2004 blueprint from 20 years ago. But there's also a misunderstanding that blueprint was a hard-to-bring growth boundary. We wouldn't grow beyond a certain edge. In some ways, I know that wouldn't be popular, but it would be easier and simpler if there was a line. There is no line necessarily. This is about a balanced approach to growth. So some greenfield, some existing community, and some infill. And that's exactly what this discussion scenario has with you. A couple of the key points. This discussion scenario and any of the alternatives that we would pursue are absolutely consistent with your local general plans. So this is not SACOG coming in and saying you should do this. This is looking at your general plans and working with your staff and trying to figure out, because those are very general and they go really far out, what in the next through 2050 in your general plans would actually make up and be part of this projection and this plan eventually. Final couple of things. If a new growth developing area, greenfield project, any project is not in this plan this cycle, that does not stop it cold in its tracks. You can proceed, you can keep going, okay? So in terms of the land use scenario that you'll be asked to make a decision on in June. And finally, and I know this is really important to say, in fact, so important, we have said this, we have written this in our plan the last several cycles. There is nothing in this plan that takes away your local land use authority. Nothing in this plan that takes away your local land use authority. There will be a lot of calls to action probably that will require you as local agencies, right? Just like Green Means Go, to adopt policies, and us in a region and you around this table to figure out how will we achieve this plan. You have the final ultimate authority on land use and housing and everything that you know you have. So I just wanted to say those things just to make sure we are all clear. I'm going to hand it back to the team.
Okay, thanks, James, and good morning, board members, and thank you for the opportunity to present you all an update on the 2025 blueprint. So just starting off with a little bit of review here, what is the blueprint? The blueprint is one of course, our primary functions as a regional government. It outlines recommendations for land use and transportation strategies for the SACOG region over the next 20 to 30 years. It's shaped by the triple bottom line, and it includes a sustainable community strategy, or an SCS, demonstrating how the region could achieve the GHG emissions reduction target through integrated land use and transportation. We've talked about this a little bit before, but if we cannot demonstrate a path towards achieving that target, we are at risk of losing eligibility for some key competitive grant opportunities that are at the state level. We've talked about that as a group. That's summarized again in the same attachment that you've seen before. It's attachment C. And in fact, since 2018, the region has received over $500 million in transportation funding from those competitive grant programs that are requiring that SCS. So over $500 million at stake here. So where are we headed? And Director Villegas, you did a great job explaining this, but we are kind of using what we learned from the Pathways effort and working towards a single set of land use and transportation assumptions, which will eventually become what we're calling the final scenario. You're hearing today about the discussion scenario. It's going to be honed further by your feedback over the next couple of months. And then the board would be asked to adopt a land use scenario in June, which would allow us to kind of continue that transportation conversation over the summer and through the fall. And then the board would be asked to adopt a final scenario in October and November, which kind of solidifies the land use and the transportation assumptions together. We had an opportunity to get much more into the process and engagement to date on this project in committee, and this is all sort of in your staff report. I'm happy to get into any engagement questions you might have after the presentation, but maybe just in the interest of time, it's worth just saying that there's been a tremendous amount of outreach and collaboration, particularly with your local government planners to get to the discussion scenario that you see before you. So what do the land use assumptions actually look like? This was referenced a couple of times before. It's worth saying again, we are very proud that we believe we have put together a set of land use assumptions that when we pair them with some identified policies, will put us in striking distance of actually achieving that GHG target. So Zach's going to get a little bit more into the details on exactly how close we are getting and with what policies, but I'm just going to give a high-level overview here of where we landed in our approach to getting to the assumptions that we actually did. So the discussion scenario land use assumptions are organized and summarized by our community types. You should be very familiar with these. Now you see them on the screen. They're summarized in attachment D. And these community types start with centers and corridors and established communities. And in the staff report and in this presentation, we're going to be providing some statistics on how much growth is occurring in this kind of combined area between the centers and corridors and established communities, which make up the vast majority of what we think about as our existing urban footprint in the region. It's where 90% of today's residents live, much higher percent where they work. These are areas that definitely include more urban areas like we are right now, but they also include more suburban areas like those on the screen. So this is very much not an area that is entirely super urban centric. This is a detailed spreadsheet. This is in your packets and it's an important one. It's in attachment A, which summarizes the assumptions in each jurisdiction and community type. It's divided into existing conditions, which we call base here, theoretical build out, which is what's allowed in your general plans and specific plans. And then it has the discussion scenario assumptions, the 2020 to 2035 growth and the 2020 to 2050 growth. We also included a link to this in your staff report. This is an interactive map to kind of show how each of those rows in the spreadsheet corresponds to a geographic area. It's completely interactive. You can toggle by jurisdiction, by county, regional community type, by individual plan area. All the assumptions will update on the right there, including some additional data that we didn't have before around kind of historical permitting data and some of the spatial distribution splits that we're talking about. So this slide is showing the spatial distribution of new housing with the percent of housing that is happening in the combined centers and corridors and established communities we just spoke about. And as you recall in Pathways, we explored 3 very different futures in this percentage, ranging from less than half of growth happening in centers and corridors and established communities, ranging all the way up to 88% in Pathway 3. The discussion scenario is slightly more compact than Pathway 2. It comes in at 68% of housing that's happening in these areas. This essentially matches the proportion of completed housing units that have been built in the 2018 to 2022 period, which is 67%. That's the most recent 5-year data set that we have. On the job side, the pathways range from 76% to 89% of new jobs occurring in these centers and corridors and established communities. If you look at where jobs increased between 2016 and 2020, you actually get higher than Pathway 3 with almost 90%. The discussion scenario falls between Pathway 1 and Pathway 2 with 81% of new jobs happening in these areas. And James was sort of referencing this. I know so far in this presentation, we've been talking a lot about centers and corridors and established communities. Really important to say we are by no means assuming low growth in our developing communities. This is very much a balanced approach. If you look at the discussion scenario, 2020 to 2035, annualized housing and job growth in those developing communities that you see in purple, it's significantly higher than what we've actually seen on a yearly basis in our most recent trends. So the discussion scenario is actually quite ambitious about growth in developing communities when you compare it to some of our recent trends. The challenge that we have on developing communities, and actually this is a challenge across our community types, not just in developing communities, is that there is orders of magnitude of remaining capacity in local plans than can actually reasonably be assumed by the horizon year of our plan. When you add up all of the proposed housing in all of the developing and potential developing communities, there is room for over 400,000 new units. And remember, our SACOG's entire regional growth forecast in the 2020 to 2050 period is 278,000 new homes. That's for the whole region, and that is a very ambitious growth forecast. That's actually on an annual basis higher than what we've really seen in the last 10 years. So we're increasing it, and it's still quite less, right? So in the 2020 to 2050 discussion scenario, assumes 86,000 homes occur in these developing and potential developing communities. So you can kind of see the math challenge here. There's just significantly more units that are planned in these areas than will be in the blueprint. So what was the approach for actually getting to the assumptions that we did in the discussion scenario? So this slide is explored in much more detail in your staff reports, but there were 4 key inputs that helped shape these assumptions. First and foremost, and this has been referenced many times, we wanted to put something in front of you that we think can actually achieve the GHG target and ensure that we remain eligible for those key state transportation funding. The board also eventually needs to adopt a plan that is feasible to implement. So that was a necessary condition that staff has embedded into this scenario. In fact, feasibility is something that we need to demonstrate as part of SES compliance to the Air Resources Board. The assumptions are also optimizing for the triple bottom line and the triple bottom line goals to the extent feasible by trying to solve for performance metrics that are associated with equity, environment, and economy. And then the assumptions are also incorporating local feedback. The vast majority of the feedback that we have received on the discussion scenario over the last 6 months or so was for minor shifts to bring assumptions more in line with recent development trends, updates to kind of key pipeline projects, some policy changes that have happened in the more recent history, infrastructure investments. So SACOG has made adjustments to the assumptions to reflect these comments. There were a couple more significant requests for shifts that would have jeopardized the ability to achieve the target that we did not entirely reflect in the April discussion scenario before you. So digging in a bit on this necessary condition to achieve the GHG target. This is a VMT map from the discussion scenario. It's looking at 2035 average household VMT. Looks probably pretty similar to the outputs of our model from the pathways that you've seen in the past. VMT is lowest in places with lots of destinations. So, when you're driving, the trips are relatively short. In some of the best performing locations in the region, you might not necessarily need a car for every one of your trips. And then this is the 2035 discussion scenario VMT by our community types relative to 2020. So similarly, we see our best VMT performance in centers and corridors, followed by established communities, which are coming in just under the regional average there, then above average for developing communities that have already started construction by 2020, followed by higher VMT in developing communities that haven't started construction but are included in the discussion scenario. We really tried to craft the discussion scenario in a way that balances growth across the community types. We're recognizing that we will have growth in developing communities, but that growth is really balanced with robust growth in centers and corridors and in established communities. That's, as James referenced, going to require removing barriers to seeing some of that growth in places that are below the dotted line. We talk about development friction with this board before, right? That is what we're talking about there. That is what we're doing with Green Means Go. It's also going to mean doing what we can to reduce VMT in developing communities. So sort of shrinking those purple bars there by ensuring that the growth is, to the extent we can, efficient, that it's complete, that it ideally does not require a car for every trip. Sure.
Yeah, may I ask a brief? Okay, all right, I'll hold it. Thank you.
Sure. So perhaps the most meaningful tool that we have towards achieving our target is robust housing growth in our centers and corridors and established communities. This is probably our best tool that we have as a part of this process. We know from Pathways modeling that we will not be able to achieve the target with a growth pattern that resembles Pathway 1. And actually, in fact, it was going to be a challenge we discovered by looking at just the growth pattern in Pathway 2. So based on that, the discussion scenario seeks to improve upon the amount of housing in these lower VMT areas relative to Pathway 2, and it brings that proportion more in line with recent trends over the last 5 years. On the job side, the discussion scenario includes less job growth in centers and corridors and established communities relative to Pathway 2. The flip side of that, of course, is that it means more jobs in developing communities. And that is, from our triple bottom line perspective, certainly an economic prosperity play, but it's also a VMT and a greenhouse gas play because it allows developing communities to kind of become less of a bedroom community and kind of more of a complete community that has a mix of housing, jobs, services, and destinations. And there's actually some early signs of movement that are kind of supporting this idea with emerging job centers in developing communities like the medical campus in Folsom South of 50. We talked about that a little bit in Lunar. Sutter Point, the Woodland Research and Technology Park, the livable employment area in Elk Grove, the Placer One Sac State campus in unincorporated Placer County. These are places where the discussion scenario is leaning in to job growth as a means of improving VMT performance in those developing communities. And then the second necessary condition that we had for the discussion scenario development was to ensure that the assumptions remain feasible so that you all can adopt a plan that can be implemented. And this is one that we take very seriously because, as I mentioned, we of course want to reflect on the ground realities. We also are required to by the state and federal government. And we remain feasible in a few different ways. So the first, and James referenced this as well, is that everything in the discussion scenario is consistent with and implementing your local plans. That is not a requirement, right? Other regions across the state are not necessarily doing this, especially in regions that have, fairly constrained general plans, right? But we keep everything down to the parcel level in line with what is planned for locally. And we do that by creating this regional build-out inventory. It takes the thousands of local designations in your plans and specific plans and consolidates them into these regional place types, which you can kind of see the tapestry for on the screen. We also painstakingly create a pipeline project inventory for all projects that have been built since 2020 that are under construction today or kind of really far along in the entitlement process, have some sort of approved tentative map. And as you can imagine, this is a bit of a moving target for 28 jurisdictions, but we do spend a lot of time trying to make sure that our assumptions are reflecting all of these projects that are moving forward. We vet all of this as well with your local staff. We're also looking at recent permitting trends at the community type level to kind of get a sense of how quickly different areas are growing. No need to squint here. This is in your packets. This is in attachment E, and it's all based off of permitting data that your staff provide the state as part of your housing element annual progress reports. We also look at where those completed permits happen at a regional level in terms of how much growth is occurring in these different community types. And as I mentioned before, the discussion scenario is actually in line with the regional share of housing that is happening in centers and corridors and established communities, at least in the last 5-10 years. And then we also look at readiness factors for some of our developing communities in particular to kind of think through how likely is this project to happen based off of regulatory and market factors that you see in the table. And I know this is pretty small, so this is provided in attachment F, but we're looking at questions like, is the specific plan or the master plan approved? Does it require annexation, right? Are there litigation issues? Is it proximate to jobs and destinations? Does it require major transportation projects that don't have identified funding sources yet? These are all questions that influence readiness that we are considering. So I'm going to pass it over to Zach to talk a little bit more about how this discussion scenario is actually performing across the triple bottom line.
All right, thank you, Dov. So as Dov mentioned, the discussion scenario is very much based in the triple bottom line framework adopted by this board in 2022 that Dov went into a bit of detail earlier. So the plan's really aiming to come together around a collective vision to advance economic prosperity, support environmental health and resiliency, and promote equity through reducing transportation and housing disparities across the region. So the discussion scenario was really shaped by the triple bottom line goals of equity, economy, and environment, as outlined in the policy framework adopted by the board. So now let's get into some performance indicators here. So a bit later, I'll be talking more about the greenhouse gas performance of the discussion scenario, but I do want to highlight there are a lot of other performance metrics and indicators that we look at when analyzing the discussion scenario. So what you see in front of you are just a few of the many performance indicators we look at when we're developing the plan assumptions. All these indicators you see here in front of you have a direct tieback to the triple bottom line policy framework. So one example of this, one of the statements in the triple bottom line is to better connect the region's workforce, in particular lower income residents, to jobs and opportunities. So you can see in the numbers in front of you here, there's a doubling of homes in the region within a half mile of high frequency transit. And then similarly, jobs within 30-minute drive or transit trip of homes is going up substantially here. And also, as you can see, the discussion scenario is improving access between homes, jobs, and opportunity areas, and really giving people the ability to have shorter trips to access these jobs and services. So similarly, on the equity side of things, you can see that those same metrics relative to environmental justice areas are at similarly high rates. So moving down the table a bit, looking at the VMT per capita, that is going down with the discussion scenario. And this is what really drives the greenhouse gas reduction that will help our region hit our greenhouse gas targets set by the California Air Resources Board. So at the very bottom in red there, you can see that congestion increases a bit by about 1%. But if you think about the number of people that will be adding to the region, approximately 600,000 people by 2050, this is a relatively modest increase in at a regional scale. And then finally, just to kind of put a dot on this, these are just very few of the many indicators that we're looking at. There's a whole host of additional metrics that are being analyzed and assessed as part of the discussion scenario. So now moving on to the greenhouse gas target. So the discussion scenario as of today, as James had mentioned earlier, is getting us to right around 18% greenhouse gas reduction, or approximately 1% shy of our 19% target that has been assigned to us by the California Air Resources Board. So there are programs that SACOG staff has been looking at and others that the board has suggested that we anticipate will help us get the rest of the way there on this greenhouse gas target. So for example, we have not yet included any pricing strategies in this greenhouse gas calculation, as this is a discussion we really want to have with the board later on in the process. So for example, we would need to assess if it would be likely that the state would move to a more mileage-based pricing system as opposed to the gas tax system currently in place. So if we determine that's a reasonable assumption with all the data and information that we have, this could give us the ability to really use this as a management tool in our region that could help us further, work towards that greenhouse gas target and that goal. School bus recovery is another strategy that has been brought up a few different times at board and committees. And this shows a lot of potential, but that in itself, that one policy in itself would not get us all the way there. And then, of course, there are other strategies such as transportation demand management. These are, first mile, last mile connections to transit. Guaranteed ride home. If you take, an alternative form of transportation into work, having that alternative ride home guaranteed, through a rideshare service, telework policies. And then there's also other policies such as reduced transit fares and others. So this is all to really say that the discussion scenario is within striking distance of our greenhouse gas target. And we think that we'll be able to get there with this discussion scenario with the implementation of a few of these other strategies put up in front of you here today. So now where we're headed in terms of the additional options that Director Villegas, as well as others have mentioned prior to me getting up here. So we heard from this board that in addition to the discussion scenario, you would all like to see some additional potential options for growth patterns around developing communities within the plan. So to that end, we developed a few additional options that you'll see here today for you to consider, and that you could direct staff to further develop and analyze prior to the June board meeting, in which we hope to have the board take action on a single set of land use assumptions for this plan. So the first option, obviously the discussion scenario, which you just heard a lot about. So this is one option, and we've heard that, it gets us very close to our greenhouse gas target. So you could almost use this as a backstop of sorts if you do want to explore one additional option before June, knowing that this is more than likely going to get us the ability to hit that greenhouse gas target. Option 2, prioritize performance. So for this option, we would assume more of the overall growth in developing and potentially developing communities would occur in those areas that have the strongest likelihood of lower VMT. And we have based this on the pathways analysis and other factors like adjacency to existing development and jobs housing balance. So the assumption is that this alternative would be comparable in the GHG performance, if not a bit better as it relates to greenhouse gas performance to the discussion scenario, since the total amount of growth in the developing community areas would be roughly the same, but would be more so allocated to the higher developing communities that have higher VMT performance. So this option would essentially be turning up the volume on VMT performance as a policy objective and criteria in the development of the land use assumptions for these developing community areas. And it would more than likely result in a kind of reshuffling of the deck in terms of what you've seen that's been currently allocated in the discussion scenario for the potentially developing and developing community areas. So then moving on to option 3, the more complete communities strategy. So this option would assume more complete build out of developing and potentially developing communities, but in fewer locations. So we would prioritize those developing communities that have the strongest likelihood of lower VMT based on the pathways analysis and other factors similar to option 2, like adjacency to existing development and jobs housing balance. It's important to note for this option, the assumption is, it would perform similar on the greenhouse gas side of things, if not better, but it would be a consolidation. So a consolidation in the fact that there would be fewer developing and potentially developing communities included in the plan, because we'd be kind of consolidating a lot of those allocations from the discussion scenario into fewer developing community areas. So in summary, this option would essentially be consolidating the developing and potentially developing community growth currently shown in the discussion scenario into fewer planned developments in order to really optimize for VMT and greenhouse gas performance by increasing their build out. So finally, we have continued engagement with all local staff regarding all these land use assumptions and have requested additional feedback from local staff on these two options. So we're looking forward to working further with your all staff and all the local agency staff throughout the region, depending on which option you decide to go with today. So if you choose to move forward with one of these new options set before you today, staff will develop land use assumptions for the alternative chosen and then analyze its performance really at a sketch level and bring those results back to you at the May board meeting. Then in June, as has been mentioned already, we would bring you two options, so the discussion scenario, and if you do choose an alternative option today, we would bring you those two options. And then we would ask you to take action on one of those options at the June board meeting to really lock in those land use assumptions for the plan. So with that, I think we can open it up to questions.
All right, thank you very much. Exactly. So, and I apologize to colleagues for making you wait until the end. I just didn't know how long it was going to take. So I know we could have more questions that get elicited when we ask questions. So one household item, we have a lot of public comments as well. So I am going to ask after we do questions from the board, if those in the public can consolidate their thoughts into 2 minutes. Just so I want to make sure we get through everything and that we have as much of the board here in case anyone has to leave early. So just wanted to set the table there. So with that, I know Director Sander, I'm going to start with you because you were the first one to get to me, and then Director Kozlowski.
All right, that's probably work out well because I have kind of some fundamental questions. One of the early data sheets you showed was a current analysis of jobs and housing and then projected jobs and housing. So for my next comment, I'm not going to point any fingers. I'm an infill community and a growth community. So I'm sort of sitting right on the line, right? But as I look through that data, I see some things that really jump out at me as being unreasonable. You know, there are communities there, let's say, I'll make up some numbers, that are going to add 20,000 housing units. And in parallel with that, they're anticipating 80,000 jobs being added. A lot of that to existing community. That would be probably a world record. So that doesn't strike me at all as reasonable. The highest ratio you've got in the region is actually my community with jobs per housing unit, where we're more than 2 jobs per housing unit, but the regional average is nowhere near that. So that leads me to wonder either, you know, why would a community have a plan that would seriously propose that level? And are they perhaps trying to spike something for benefit in this analysis? And when I see the next slide come up that shows VMT and so your heat map, it kind of looks to me like the spiking is successful. So I'm really worried about how we interpreted that data, whether or not we discounted any of those jobs assumptions, and where that sort of VMT heat map is coming from. So those are pretty fundamental questions what we're talking about today. Because you've got other communities that are saying, yeah, we're going to add 40,000 housing units and 10,000 jobs. But some communities are saying we're going to add 80,000 jobs and 20,000 housing units. It's really, really extreme variation.
My question is an additional piece to that, which is, are we seeing the projected housing units skewed by the RHNA requirements also, where the housing units are irrationally high relative to having to keep zone property available for that multifamily type development? So it goes hand in hand with that, which either one could be a distortion.
So I guess I would respond in a couple ways, and maybe, I don't know if James and Casey want to add in on this, but on the VMT map, So this is not, so this is 2035. So you're certainly correct in the sense that this is reflecting the existing plus growth. The growth pales in comparison to the existing. So if you were to look at, and we can provide certainly, and we have before, the 2020 existing conditions VMT map, it would look very, very similar to this. So the growth is really not skewing, in a general sense, what parts of the region have lower VMT than high. The other thing that I would mention is that, and this is a common question that we have when we talk with local governments, right, is that I think what you're referring to is in attachment A, you have existing conditions, and then you have build out conditions, right, which are a reflection of the theoretical, if you were to just say all of the buildings that are kind of proposed at the local level happen and are filled by people, right? And those build out numbers are often, you're absolutely correct, astronomical, right? And then on the far right side of the attachment A spreadsheet, you see the growth that we assume in the discussion scenario. And that's where I think we sort of really try to rein it in based on reasonableness factors. So you're absolutely right that there are definitely parts of the region that theoretically, under the proposed build out under existing plans, have really high numbers for units and or for jobs. And but they're not necessarily reasonable to assume all of those units and jobs. And so that's why the growth numbers that you see in the 20 to 35 and the 20 to 50 period are much lower than those build out numbers. I'm not sure if I'm totally answering your question, but.
So the right side of the chart then is the basis for further analysis.
The right side of the chart is the growth that we assume as a part of the discussion scenario, and it's
And you've
significantly less than what is
discounted basically
Correct.
what you read from the plan.
correct.
That's a very challenging step to go through.
It
So
is.
I think I'm probably gonna need a lot more information on that offline.
Okay.
I'll take the RENA discussion offline. The one thing I was going to comment on is just to clarify for people that may not have tracked this exactly. We started with 3 pathways. We consolidated them into a discussion scenario, which is different than the 3 pathways. It itself is option 1. And then we now have an option 2 and 3. Is that correct in terms of the naming of these things?
Exactly. You got it.
Okay, so going forward, can we stick with just, if we come up with another variation, it'd be option 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and not skip steps in the
Well,
naming
to
convention?
be clear, I don't think there's an option 4, 5, and 6. It's,
I'm just saying it's
Yeah, sure.
possible, right?
yep, you got it right though.
We jumped
Yep.
through a step there.
Yep.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Director Kozlowski, thank you for clarifying that, because as I was prepping for this board meeting, I wasn't quite sure, what what the discussion scenario meant, but I want to commend our SAGOG staff. Your presentation today was excellent in helping us work through this complex network of decisions, and I think we all feel the weight of getting this right as this year rolls out. So you've helped us do that. You answered a lot of my questions already. My question right now revolves around the 2 options that you presented to us. Whether we also want to consider VMT performance or complete communities as we look at developing communities and where we're going with growth in the future, recognizing that that is a challenging discussion. My question is, could we combine those? Because here's where I'm coming from. VMT performance does not work in rural communities, and recognizing that we're a vast, the SAGOG region is a vast and diverse community. Whereas in rural regions, I represent El Dorado County, I can see us really working to make sure that any development that comes online that is not in the blueprint and in the future is a more complete community with jobs and housing and services and needs and transportation needs. And so could we combine the 2 that may work better for our diverse region? And how would you do that? How would you go about that?
Yeah, I think option 3 is essentially that.
Okay.
So option 2 would prioritize based on VMT, obviously. And we're not proposing that we reallocate on a countywide basis, taking, development currently allocated to developing and potentially developing communities, say from Yuba to Sacramento County. Everything you see in the discussion scenario, those numbers would stay somewhat the same, right? And so Option 3 would incorporate VMT because we're trying to hit that greenhouse gas target, obviously, would incorporate, that would incorporate the VMT performance, some sort of VMT performance criteria as well. And you probably use that criteria along with other criteria, which have yet to be established because we don't know which option that will be chosen here today, to help consolidate the potentially developing and developing community allocations, excuse me, in the discussion scenario into fewer of these communities. So
Throughout the region, or, I mean, so let's say I guess my concern is if you consolidate more communities within the Sacramento region, that leaves less communities out in the more rural parts of the SACOG region to be developed. So I assume you would balance that throughout the region.
yes, it would be balanced, similar to what you see in the discussion scenario. So we're not going to be pulling from one county and putting units in another county.
Thank you. All right, that helps. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Chair. So thank you to staff for all the work on this. I mean, it's truly a huge amount of data and information that you have to chug through and present to us. And, we're working through this. Obviously, it takes a very long time. So based on what I saw today, I think the discussion scenario option 1 is realistic from a numerical standpoint at the high level. I mean, I think it's kind of near where we are now, right? So, I mean, it's kind of hard to say that's not reality when it's super close to where we are. And I'm supportive of it at a high level. So, but I think the devil's in the details. And I think, yesterday on the plane a little bit, and once I got home and, before I went to bed early, to recover from cap to cap, I spent some time looking through the specifics, and I have lots and lots of questions and some concerns. And I imagine there's many people in the room that have those questions and concerns. And I know we can't get into those here. So my ask though is that, in the next week or two, we could have a meeting between myself and the appropriate SACOG staff and Yuba County staff to really talk through those specific numbers and why those numbers are what those numbers are. And then just as importantly, because of those assumptions, because of those numbers, how did that inform the transportation projects that were on the list and not on the list? And so really what I'm looking for is just a detailed understanding of how we got from, A to Z. And I know we're not even close to Z, but, maybe A to C or wherever we are today in the process. I think that would be really, really helpful. And then specific to what we talked about today, in addition to option 1, I'm very interested in the results of option 3 and seeing, how that plays out, again, with those particular details as a region and as a jurisdiction. So anyway.
Okay. And to your first point, we've initiated that engagement, as I mentioned before, with all local jurisdictions and offered, to take in all comments, and then also staff to staff kind of meetings and coordination. So that should go pretty seamlessly.
Okay.
So we could get that on the books.
Just to add that to that, I'm looking for staff to staff to direct.
Yes,
at
yes,
that meeting. So,
definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, just a couple of comments, and I'm going to reiterate a couple of things from, without detail, from the lunar meeting. I'm really interested in seeing what option 3 is. I think we as a board probably have all received some input from people in the community regarding the interest in at least looking at option 3 to see what a fully developed community would do, how it would perform against both infill and the discussion scenario. And so I know staff's agreed to sit down and do that. In addition to meeting with city staff or county staff on this, I would encourage, like I did at the lunar meeting, to reach out to our partners in the community that have shown interest in this to get their feedback as well. One of the things I just wanted to point out, and I won't belabor my comments, but projects that do not get into the blueprint, you're right, can go forward, but it is at the risk of not being eligible for certain funding mechanisms, right?
Yes, that would be correct.
Okay.
For transportation projects specifically.
Okay, and then also my last point is, as we look at the data, we as a board have to decide what the priority of that data is in terms of the weight of it, right? And so I bring up Salt Lake City again, and James, you'll have to help me with the name of that community that was out in the middle of nowhere.
Daybreak.
Daybreak. Very interesting community. I suspect their VMT performance is pretty high and are done well, I should say. And so I think we can't lose that in the equation as well. I think we need to really look at that. So I would suggest coming back with option 3 as well and with those data points there so we can evaluate it when we make our final decision in June. That's it.
Director Lozano, can I just say something that's kind of like the nutrition label on the back of food, whether you want to look at it or not. The graphic on the screen here, and we hope you all appreciate this is a lot of input, and staff has come up with these options. And yes, obviously we had a long, good discussion at the Land Use Committee on this. If you want to achieve your greenhouse gas target, you got about 86,000 plus minus units in new growth areas, right? And part of the problem that a lot of folks have raised, which is a real problem experienced in places like south of Folsom right now, is when you're in partial build out, it is not going to work as well. If we can get to the full build out and more complete build out, it should perform better. It will vary, across the region. But if you want to achieve the greenhouse gas target, you're going to have, in this option, you're going to see fewer of those green fields that are more built out. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and as described on the slide, certainly get that. I would just suggest that if at all possible, have the flexibility to say, generically speaking, these types of projects would be good to go if they're in the, as they get into the entitlement process and all of that, rather than saying, and I don't know that we need to do this, and this is one of the questions I have is, if project A, B, and C are available, or there are people willing to build these complete communities, are we picking which one happens and which one doesn't? Or are we just going by the general plans of each of our jurisdictions?
You will have to, right, in June, adopt, as you have done the last 3 plans, or probably forever since we've done planning, but under the 19%, the last 3 plans, you'll have to have a land use forecast, and you'll have to project forward which of those communities show up in our plan. It is true there is on the transportation side, the transportation projects, the larger ones have to be in our plan. But even if, and I understand there's a real benefit if you have a greenfield community to be in our plan. We understand that absolutely. It doesn't hold up your planning and your progress, though. That's the thing I want to make sure we encourage and understand. And Director Kozlowski made this comment, the Land Use Committee. If this board wants to, and look, you'll have flexibility at the May board meeting, you want to come back and look at alternatives, you have that discussion. You give us feedback and we keep iterating and we come to June. But if you want to show more complete built out communities, the question Director Kozlowski asked, not unlike Green Means Go on infill, is we can't just imagine it's going to happen. There has to be a policy behind that. And SACOG is not the implementer of that. You all are, and the market and the development community, but you have a role in that. And so that'll be the question we ask is like, how can we make sure that we have more of these that get built out on a reasonable time frame? And is there infrastructure that needs to, those are the questions for implementation. Now the good news is you have the next 18 months to talk implementation, and we'll be doing that.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Yes, Director Gadden-Carrillo, and then.
Thank you very much. And again, just wanted to echo comments from the other board members with regards to appreciation of the assimilation of all this data. There's a tremendous number of numbers in here, and I do appreciate that. Just a very, very simple question, and that is CARB assigned our region with this 19% greenhouse gas reduction target. I'm just wondering if there's been any thought at all in this process, and I'm kind of guessing I know what an answer is, as to what we're doing individually to help achieve that. Because this plan is trying to get us at that 19%. But some of us are doing some big things trying to get us there with regards to our own individual communities. So has that been rolled into this at all?
I think it would be rolled in terms of kind of existing conditions. That would just be kind of baked into that existing conditions analysis. But we're currently Executive Director Corliss is currently, meeting with all the jurisdictions, conducting outreach, and that's one of the real aspects of this plan for this iteration, the 2025 blueprint, that we want to concentrate on to make sure that every jurisdiction within the region is really sees itself within this plan. And we're trying to kind of tailor, maybe different policies on specific to greenhouse gas reduction, to your point, to those regions, instead of just having one kind of very overarching plan that is just kind of using the same policies and implementation actions across all jurisdictions. Does that answer your question?
Sort of.
We're thinking about it. Yeah.
Auburn is a very small community, but we just had our sustainability committee report to us on greenhouse gas reductions from 2005 to today. And we've reduced our number 50%. 50%. And the big thing that we did was we purchased renewable energy as our energy source, our electricity. We're 100% green. We've done some other things, but I'm just saying, but just wondering, I mean, that's an existing
Director
condition.
D'Avocavio, the very unsatisfying answer to your question is that's not going to show up as a benefit in this plan. However, we applaud you to do it because we want to try to take a bigger, for real, we want to try to take a bigger picture look at this, right? And it all matters. It does sometimes feel like an accounting exercise. However, I would also say, as Zach just mentioned, what we would love to do, and I'm talking about some of this, is back to implementation. Whatever this plan says, right? We know we have a big lift in front of us as a region. Forget even the greenhouse gas for a second. What does it look like for each of your jurisdictions to say, we got 2 to 3 things that we want to do and that contribute to regional goals? Let's spell those out in the plan. You need regional help. You need state help. You need federal help, right? Let's make this locally owned. And that's going to be the conversation we have from this fall to next fall on implementation. And guess what? Each of those 2 and 3 things will be completely different in each community because that speaks to the diversity of our region. It is not a one-size-fits-all plan, and it shouldn't be.
Director.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. So lot of information here. And it's really hard to accomplish a real discussion in 2 hours, 2.5 hours. We probably need a whole day to really hash out some of the details here. And I was particularly impressed with Director Saunders' comments. One of the things that I really want to bring to people to think about is I'm a baby boomer. Most of these people in this room are baby boomers. Our generation is going to die within the next 20 years. That's 25% of the entire, hold on.
Okay,
Sorry.
I think you made the discussion a lot shorter.
Okay. So the bottom line is 25% of our population is going to follow natural causes. And we're only replacing ourselves by 1.6 children for every 2 couples. We're seeing a reduction in California of people, while other people are moving out of the urban centers into the suburbs. That's what people are doing, is people don't want to live where it's not safe, okay, to live. So the other piece that I wanted to mention is we are seeing retirement communities pop up everywhere. Where are those people coming from? What happens to those homes that are vacant there? So when you start thinking about this, you got to put this whole thing in perspective, not just, well, Jesus, this is what we got to look at the future. What are we looking at, 20 years down the road when we start seeing vacancies, huge vacancies of homes that people in the market will adjust. So that's my comment. I think everybody here made some pretty good comments, but I think we can't ignore the fact that,
We're all gonna die.
naturally, hey, it's a natural course of business here, folks.
All right. We got you, Sue.
I got an extra 5 years. I'm generous.
I think what I'm gonna do at this point is, let's go ahead and if we have more questions, we'll get to them, but let's go ahead and open up for public comments. Oh, or no, actually, I know we have one more, so direct, Vice Chair soon.
No, that's-
And then,
Yeah, it'll be very quick. So again, also staff, thank you so much for all this work, a lot of data crunching. I had a clarification question on this, on one of the slides you mentioned, total demand management was listed as a 2%, I think, reduction for greenhouse gas, but then you also listed on the side, not included was TDM, telework policy. So I just was wondering if you could distinguish what, you have TDM listed in the chart, but you also have TDM listed as additional strategies not included. Do you?
Yeah, so I think that would be some additional TDM policies that maybe weren't included as part of the last plan. So a lot of those, that 2% reduction is essentially associated with what was included in the last plan, the 2020 MTPSCS. And so there are some additional TDM programs, telework policies, et cetera, that could be incorporated to get, some kind of fractional benefit as well.
Okay, so all those taken together, not included, when you say fractional benefit, I mean, are you estimating a 0.5%, 0.1%?
All the ones listed on the side, the additional
side.
strategies.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think how much of deficit of that we're down by 1%, and how much of that of the side you think?
Yeah, it's definitely a range. It would be at this point, since we haven't done the detailed modeling, we had presented as a range, but I mean, it would be it's not going to be a satisfying answer, but it would be 0 to probably with all of those together at 2% possibly that we could get an additional 2%. So there's enough there to get that 1%.
That's great to hear. Okay, that's very promising. Thank you. And yeah, just real quick, I mean, I appreciate the Lunar Committee's work. I think that option 3A or this new 3, I think provides a little more, it's better to be able to estimate more accurately with certainty because you have communities that are developing. So appreciate that. And then if there's any flexibility within that, meaning that we're talking about whole projects, but perhaps if, generically, if we can allocate, percentages of build outs to different projects, again, to be more flexible, that might also be more realistic. Thank you.
thank you, Vice Chair. Director Branscombe.
First, and with respect to staff, if we want this to be the board's blueprint, clearly the board's blueprint and not the staff's blueprint, not the board's. And no offense there, but right now although there's a tremendous amount of work going on there and we're getting little windows here, I think a great deal, a significantly greater deal of time needs to be spent at this level with the entire board. And I know, Gary, you want to get together, and I think one-on-ones and what have you are useful, but we all need to hear everything. And we want this to be the board's blueprint, number one. Number two, the greenhouse gas targets, which seem to be driving most of the decisions here. I'm presuming there are some assumptions made there with respect to how many people are going to be buying electric vehicles. And that has to be blown up in real time. I mean, the CEO of Hertz resigned under pressure because he had to sell 20,000 cars that were no longer desirable by their customers, all electric vehicles. Cost them $250 million. I go back to the 80s. A client of mine was the developer of Stanford Ranch. And HP and NEC and these other companies were coming here. And all that was greenfield. And look what a great success it was. I'm not certain there's really room for the potential type of greenfield development, I mean, for the type of growth. And a number of opportunities I think are going to be missed here in this region if we do not make room for greenfield development. I can't imagine most of the people moving into this region want to move inside the existing footprints for pure infill. Now, certainly there's going to be some, but I would presume we're seeing a lot of growth around the perimeter. That's where people want to live. That's our attraction let's not cut our throat in terms of what's making us attractive. Those are just brief thoughts. I know you're under time pressure.
Thank you, Director Branscombe. So we'll go ahead and go to public comments now. And like I said, and I apologize, I usually would do the full 3 minutes, but if you could limit your comments to 2 minutes today, I would greatly appreciate it. And we'll start with Mr. Cohn, Steve Cohn, please. He left, okay. We will go to Oscar Ballinger.
Thank you. As a member of the baby boomer generation, I appreciate the reminder about some of the realities. So good morning, board members. My name is Oscar Balaguer. I represent 350 Sacramento. It's a climate advocacy 501c3. You have our written comments. I'll briefly hit the high points. We support the discussions scenarios strategy to shorten daily road trips. That approach would substantially cut regional climate impacts, help to meet carbs reduction goals, and preserve transportation funding for the region and CEQA streamlining. We agree that directing most new growth to infill is about the most feasible way to shorten trips. Our written comments explain why we believe the proposal is feasible, reasonable, consistent with policy, and provides numerous co-benefits, some of which staff has displayed today. We support option 3, directing future greenfield growth to a smaller set of low VMT projects, because this would likely, we think, result in the greatest greenhouse gas reduction and the highest quality projects. Finally, we commend staff's clear explanation of how approving competing projects way beyond market demand negates the potential benefits of so-called complete developments, because they need full, timely build-out to achieve the urban density needed to reduce VMT. We all know change is hard, and that's also that it's unavoidable. We can either change what we can while we can, or wait for ever-worsening climate change. Thank you so much for your work and for staff's efforts.
Mr. Rossi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Doug Ossie, 4013 Park Road. I can just see Councilman Schaefer's tombstone. We're all going to die. I've distributed a one-page piece that summarizes my remarks. I do want to hit two points on it. Item 1, I say not all data points are equally important. I want to bring to your attention one in particular that's been discussed this morning, the issue of the inventory of approved but as yet undeveloped lots of 400,000. Well, there's a reason those 400,000 haven't been developed. I mean, the market is saying it doesn't matter what you approve, it's what the market wants. So the 400,000 number of approved but undeveloped lots is an irrelevant or a far less relevant piece of data to you than what the market wants. So that's the point of number 1. Second point I want to make is that, thank you. The second point I want to make is that the board has access to a lot of information about option 1 in terms of an analytic report. I think you need the same level of data on options 2 and 3 in order to be able to compare them in your deliberation. And then finally, I do not want to see us throw the baby out with the bathwater, which is why I continue to talk about We need to analyze communities in their completed state rather than in their incremental state towards completion. It is a analytical fallacy to base a decision on the first 10% of a project as to whether or not that project merits your support. It's the equivalent of saying to a painter like Da Vinci or Picasso, when they have the blank canvas up there in the frame, well, that painting's not very good. Let us paint the picture. Let us paint the development. Thank you. Be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Rossi. Okay, next is Jackie Wycombe.
Good morning. My name is Jackie Whitelam. I'm here representing the AIA Central Valley. I'm an architect, but for most of my professional career, I was at CADA, and I spent those years rebuilding the neighborhood south of Capitol Park. Also in 2012 and 2013, when I led CADA, we entered into a partnership with CFY Development and have executed the development agreement for the warehouse, artist lofts, the wall on R Street. The discussion scenario that calls for 68% of new housing growth to occur in centers, commercial corridors, and established communities aligns with the housing position of the AIA Central Valley. We believe that architects, and I've provided that so you all can read it, but to summarize, we believe architects need to step up and take part in abating the affordable housing crisis and to use our professional skills to help build neighborhoods for all. Specifically, we've pledged to, 1, advance the inclusion of missing middle housing in single-family neighborhoods. 2, to advance the transformation of the aging commercial corridors that crisscross our region into mixed-use transit supportive corridors. And 3, to advance the adaptive reuse of underutilized office properties for housing. Our members are actively engaged in effecting changes to planning and building codes so that the construction of such housing can be accelerated. We all need to find a way to both build the housing we need and meet the greenhouse gas targets set for our region by the state. The discussion scenario before you offers such a path. We thank you for your thoughtful consideration of it.
Thank you very much. Sam Rice is next.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Sam Rice. I'm here on behalf of the Sacramento Metro Advocates for Rail and Transit, or otherwise known as SMART. I'm also the president of the Environmental Democrats of Sacramento County. You should have received a letter from SMART. I hope that everyone received that letter, and I'm just going to ask that to summarize a few pieces briefly. One of which is to stress how important it is that we meet our regional greenhouse gas reduction targets. That 19% target is a requirement for state and federal funding. Losing out on that state and federal funding would be catastrophic to the transportation agencies represented here. So we would hope that we would push for an even higher number rather than 19% reduction if some of the things that we're using to achieve that target come in a little lower than we've expected. Someone mentioned too the reason people come to this region and why it's so special. And the reason that people come to this region is our natural beauty and our connection to nature and our rural spaces, all of which are threatened if we fail to meet the required greenhouse gas reduction targets. We all know that a land use policy, one of which is being considered here, is the most valuable tool to meeting those goals. Another thing I wanted to touch on briefly was around the solvency of transportation agencies. You're going to talk later about a set of transportation assumptions. Those transportation assumptions are wholly reliant on the land use policies that you decide to put forward here today. Our transportation agencies in the region struggle already from a lack of density. Until we reach the required density to get to a point where transit becomes a viable mode shift for individuals here, we will not reach the VMT reduction targets that we are seeking. So what we ask is for a scenario closer to the original option 3 that will achieve an even higher portion of greenhouse gas reduction targets. And we would like to note that the housing trends moving forward are not only driven by market demand, but are driven by generational shift. And the generational shift is for a more livable, walkable, and safe community. It is not a community spent with time in your personal vehicle and expending greenhouse gas emissions targets. So in summation, please look for adopting a scenario that will move us towards a more dense and infill developed land use scenario that will support the transportation assumptions that you will see in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Dan Allison is next.
Good afternoon. On this agenda item, I'm speaking only for myself, not for the Transportation Advocacy Organization. There have been comments from board members and the public saying that the real need is for housing in the outlying areas. The facts don't really support that. Housing in dense areas like Midtown Sacramento is incredibly in demand. Rents are going up far faster than housing prices are anywhere else. That's what a lot of people want. I'm not suggesting that people don't want developments out at the edges, but there's a high demand. The city of Sacramento recognized that and developed a missing middle housing program because that was the need that was not being met in our development pattern. We need more of that. So we need to make sure that the needs of everybody are being met. And what a lot of people want is dense development in cities. That's what they want. The city, in its general plan, supported different kinds of developments. There will be a lot more infill. And the zoning plan and code has not been put out yet, but it will reflect what the general plan said. We want infill in the city, and that's what will happen. So there will be a lot denser development. I'm not saying dense, but denser development in the city of Sacramento. And the city is key to our development pattern. Is where a lot of the people in this region live. And lastly, part of the issue with greenfield development, I call it that, is not simply that it will always have a higher VMT impact, but what has gone on in this region is leapfrog greenfield development. That kind of development where there's space in between will never be supported by transit. Thank you.
And our last public comment is from Peyton Montes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Zaragoza and members of the board. My name is Peyton Montez, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Associated General Contractors of California. Our organization represents approximately 900 contractor and associate members throughout the state of California. We thank this body again for considering the sustainable community strategy to remain competitive for state funds as per SB 375. Transportation infrastructure connects people to essential opportunities, jobs, vital services, and recreation. It also enables employers to provide critical goods and services to residents of the region. The Sacramento area is unique for many reasons, one of which is that it is 14 job hubs currently in the area, which account for nearly 50% of regional employment. We've seen that that employers that have better connectivity to these job hubs outperform those that do not. SACOG and its board members in the past have made careful and thoughtful decisions on sustainable community strategy that have allowed the region to be competitive, ensuring that state and federal dollars flow to critical infrastructure projects. These decisions have included strategies on how to remain compliant with SB 375 by either meeting GHG emission targets or providing alternative planning scenario which shows how the targets can be met. It's clear that other municipal planning agencies throughout the state find themselves in a similar situation to the Sacramento region. And we ask that the board direct staff to engage in a way consistent with other MPOs and how they are addressing the situation. On behalf of the Associated General Contractors of California, we appreciate the opportunity to engage on this issue, and we look forward to that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So with that, we will go ahead and close public comments, bring this back to the board. And I know we had, staff presented us with a couple of different options to look at going forward. And I know they're probably incomplete to a lot of, that doesn't encapsulate everything that all of us want individually or maybe even collectively, but we do have to have some guardrails around what we bring forward so it's not completely scattershot. So I guess one thought I had was, and we can have more conversation here, but I wanted to just get a sense from what we have presented to us today. Is there any consensus of the two that were presented, if there's either from two or three, if there's a way, whether it's show of hands or just, verbal, one that you want to see more input on going forward, so that staff has a better direction. So if it's for two, does anyone have any thoughts on two? Does anyone like two better? How about three? I see a few hands for three. Okay, a few hands for three. So I just want to make sure staff gets the direction that you need as we move forward as well, so that we're trying to, and then that doesn't mean we don't have discussions on other things and that will be the final product, but I wanted to just make sure that we're giving some direction so that we're not
That's
trying
very,
to.
very helpful, Chair. Sir, I think we heard the same thing. I'm looking at Chair Villegas from the Land Use Committee, and if you gave us that, so we can, and I heard, you want more data, right? If you would go a little deeper on three, we would bring that probably back to the May board meeting, because I don't know we can do it by the Land Use Committee, because that's coming right up in 2 weeks. But by the May board meeting, we'd come back on option three, keep discussion scenario in parallel, but give you something on option three.
That sounds good. And I know there's a lot of one-offs as well that want to happen. If I can be helpful to any of that as well, I certainly will try to make myself available. I know I want to join in on Director Kozlowski's issue on RENA. I had some questions on that myself as it kind of interrelates. And some of that I think is just different priorities from state agencies, from the executive branch, but that's another issue. I guess.
Through the chair, just
Director,
very,
yes.
very quickly, if I
Yeah.
may. Can I request that we invite BIA to be here for these conversations? They're the people who build our communities. They're the people who know what can practically be done and what cannot. And while I know you've talked with them behind the scenes, they need to be in the room. We need to be here.
And Director Joyner, just so you're clear, I just went to BIA, actually the full council 2 weeks ago, and we went through this whole presentation. Every developer is also welcome to reach out to us, and we've taken every meeting that has been requested of us of any developer, but I just presented to the BIA. And happy to have them come. Chris Norm has been here, and we can try to make sure they're here for the May board meeting.
I'd appreciate that. I think it's important.
Great. Do we have any other comments on this item? All right, James, everybody, you guys feel good? All right, good to go? All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I really appreciate the continuing conversation here. So we will move to chair reports. James, you have anything you want to cover here?
Just real quick, I know there's a lot of interest in the Denver trip, speaking of housing and speaking of new growth areas and suburban revitalization. It's all on display in Denver. We got a lot of interest, but not everybody has registered. In fact, registrations are low so far. The link was in my executive director update. So please go ahead and register. For board members, we're able to offer that at $300. Let Lynette know if you have any questions about that. That's June 26th to June 28th. There is no policy committee next month, but there is a strategic planning committee, and that's it.
All right, and board members, anything you want to highlight? Yes.
I
Director
just
Kozlowski.
have one suggestion for the policy committee or the staff is to consider the possibility of offering, increasing our board size by at least one seat to include tribal governments in our region. Perhaps a shared seat that they could rotate or choose their representative, but I think it would be a worthwhile inclusion.
All right. Thank you.
I just want to
Yes,
celebrate,
Director Nicely,
we
yes.
passed our 2040 general plan update this month. So it started in 2020 and we're here now finally. So
Congratulations.
Just makes
we all know what a significant thing that is. So anybody else? Yes, Director Lillihan.
Okay, let's see. For the last, I think, starting the last part of February into March, I've been interviewed by CBS 13, NBC Bay Area, and Cap Radio about me being on the Geological Hazard Abatement District. And this has to do with like floods. So, and then since I personally went through a flood, that's why I got interviewed a lot. So then, and I feel like I'm helping doctoral grad student from UC Davis with this because she's spearheading this. And it's, I guess it's a passion for her. So I'm glad to help her.
Thank you, Director. Yes.
I just want to thank ZACOG for the great work you did in our Cap to Cap trip, bringing up our priorities. Well done. Leave Behind was done well in coordinating the meeting. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Director Guerrero. Yes.
Real quick, Wheatland is celebrating its 150th birthday celebration, May 18th. It just got rescheduled because of the rain. It's going to be the 100th pet parade and the 150th birthday on May 18th. So I'll get something to James. Maybe we can send it out if you guys are interested.
That'd be great. I love to go to that. So thank you. Yes.
Very quickly, second week in June, Rancho Cordova is going to be hosting the National League of Cities Board of Directors and committees and staff, about 300 people. Coming to Rancho Cordova, we're going to do a big event at Soilborn Farms on the American River in Rancho Cordova. I think everyone at this table will probably get invited. So if you get that, that's the context to it. It's an opportunity to talk to sort of leaders from all over the country about issues that concern you or them.
Great. Thank
And
you.
there'll
Director.
be great food, great music.
Perfect. Well, we always love visiting. We have the greatest, building to go and visit as well. So I will be there. Any other? Yes.
Yeah, just one last thing. I talked to James about this, I don't know, a few weeks ago. Under receive and file items that come in from committees, I've asked that there be a little more detail about robust discussion, not necessarily taking up a ton of staff time, but maybe a couple of bullet points. So for instance, if the Policy and Innovation Committee has robust discussion, I'm not on that. And so all I get is the receive and file. So if we're going to continue to do receive and file.
We're on it, Director Lozano, and I
Awesome.
hope the Lunar Committee memo today actually reflected that
Yes.
idea, reflecting discussion. So yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Lozano. That's a great point, and I appreciate that because you lose context sometimes if you don't get that. So that's really good. And then for receive and file, Mr. Mauer, I know you wanted to cover one thing quickly.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I meant to dive in on James's report, but I just want to note on the receive and file, we do have for next month, we're going to do the executive director performance evaluation. This is a routine annual thing. We do it every year, but it's on today because we'll be kicking off the process between now and then. It's confidential, which means look out in your email boxes for emails from me. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly, or you can always go through Lynette and she can put us in touch. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mauer. And I think with that, please, again, to Director Lozano's point, please read your receive and file items. There's a lot of good information in there. And with that, I will adjourn today's meeting. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks, man. Good job.
Thank you. Thanks. One of these times.